Salute to the boxing community, boxing fans, critics, and analysts. Renee Box Young. Salute from the South. One love to everybody jumping in. Got the brothers here, honorable guests as usual, here on Boxing Then and Now, part 3 of this series where we're going to talk about some very interesting stuff. We're going to talk about some roots, historic, the roots and birth of boxing, how it came about. You can see the bullet points right there. Sorry about the dogs in the background, little dogs barking out there in the yard. We're going to talk about, as you can see, the bullet points right there, in the description. We're going to talk about the certain styles, okay, of how we have seen styles evolve in the sport of boxing since the beginning. So it's going to be some interesting stuff, man. So we're gonna break it down. First and foremost, want to greet the brothers. We already chit-chatted a little bit before the live, and greet the brothers. Kurtis Anderson, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, Renee Box Young. Glad to be here. What's up, Stormy? What's up, Reggie, man? I'm ready to talk some boxing. I love this channel, man. You're doing good things, Renee Box Young. You have a very good boxing mind.
I appreciate you, brother. All love, man. All love. Stormy, how you doing, bro?
I'm doing very well, man. Thank you for having me, and salute to the rest of the brothers on the panel here, Kurt and Reggie. And I second that with what Kurt just said about you and your channel. Renee Box Young, glad to be here with you. You're doing great things here on your channel, and I'm hoping to help you in any way I can and help elevate you. People need to hear what you got to say.
Definitely, man. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you all, man. Definitely. And that's why you guys are on the show. You know what I mean? Because you guys also, amazing content, your knowledge, and you guys have just amazing background. You guys are, in general, you guys are amazing guys. You know what I mean? And you can just tell, how you guys speak, the content you guys bring forth. You know what I mean? Apart from boxing, too, you guys are very wise, intelligent guys. You know what I mean? That's why I love to have you guys on here. How you doing, Reggie? All good?
I'm doing good as well, man. And I want to repeat exactly what they said, man. You got a great show rolling over here, bro. But yeah, all in all, man, been doing real good, man. Can't complain at all.
Yeah, everybody who hasn't, maybe, I'm sure everybody has, but Reggie Owens, he does some great commentary, ringside commentary stuff, man. He throws down some old fights. Oh man, amazing stuff. You guys got to tune into that, man. Definitely with Reggie Owens. Thank you guys so much, G Funky, Bruscos, those who are entering the building. You know what I mean? And like I always say, right? Keep the virtual door open for those who are entering. G Funky, Bruscos, salute, guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And those who are going to tune in a moment, those who are going to tune in after the show, thank you guys so much. And remember to subscribe to the guests, to the honorable guest, Kurtis Anderson. Subscribe to Stormy B. Subscribe to Reggie Owens, Boxing Conversations with Reggie Owens. Subscribe to G Funky. Everybody, show the love to everybody here. Thank you guys so much for being here, man. It's such an honor and it's a pleasure. Let's get right to it. First point. Okay, we're going to talk about the origin of boxing, like I said a moment ago, how much it has evolved before. Okay, I'm just going to put it just exactly how I sent the bullet points in the email to the guests, right? The origin of boxing and how much it has evolved since or before, depending on your knowledge, you guys, okay? The bare-knuckle era. So, Kurtis, what do you know about, I have some points I could talk about, but I want to hear you guys first. Kurtis, what can you tell us about like the origin of boxing? Okay, how it has evolved, since the bare knuckle era. Back in, if I'm not mistaken, in Europe, the bare knuckle, movement started to grow, right? And I guess you can say to a certain extent, it birthed the rudiments, the crude elements of boxing as we know it today. What do you know about that, Kurtis, or what can you expound upon that?
Yes, boxing does have a birthday. January 6, 1681, the forefathers of boxing, but I credit a guy by the name of Christopher Monk. He was the Albemarle of England, the Duke of Albemarle, and later became Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. He staged a fight between his butler and a butcher. This is the first documented boxing match on record in 1681. And then in the 1700s, you know, it started to evolve. You had people like James Figg, who was the first superstar fighter. He was a bare knuckle champion from 1719 to 1730. You know, he had an amphitheater where he taught young fighters, he taught the craft of boxing, because boxing was outlawed in certain countries and certain states. And you had Jack Broughton. Jack Broughton wrote the 7-step rules, because then you had the London Prize rules, and then it evolved into the Queensberry, Marquise of Queensberry rules with boxing gloves. Boxing gloves was invented in 1747, and the Queen's rules came about 1785, and then revisited in 1787, where they started make rules for boxing gloves. And even though boxing gloves was invented in the 1700s, fighters didn't use them till a guy in England named Ted Kid Lewis. He was the first documented guy to use boxing gloves. You had John L. Sullivan, but the forefathers of boxing, John Graham and Jack Broughton and Christopher Mock, you know, these were the forefathers, and they all came from England. So, you know, you have to give England credit for inventing boxing, you know, and then, you know, John L. Sullivan was very important, because from 1882 to 1892, he was the last guy that went from the London Prize rules to the Queensberry rules. You know, he was a bare knuckle champion, and then he started to fight with gloves. But fighters, you know, back in them days, John L. Sullivan days, they would still fight bare knuckle, but they would use the gloves in sparring to protect their hands. You know, and then they started to use boxing gloves the turn of the century, in the early 1900s. You know, boxing had rules. They didn't have the standing 8 or go to a neutral corner. That was Jack Dempsey when he fought Gene Tunney, you know, and it worked against him, because he knocked Tunney down, but he didn't, he had to go to a neutral corner, you know, and it gave Tunney time to recover. That was called the infamous long count in 1927. But, you know, boxing has come a long way. It evolved from the 1600s to the 1700s to the 1800s to the turn of the century. You know, rules and regulations, and boxing was like huge in 1920s. The two biggest sports then was boxing and horse racing. You know, even Al Capone was such a huge fan of Jack Dempsey that they thought the fix would be in, so they moved the fight from Chicago to Philadelphia.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. I love it. So, I mean, it has a long trajectory. If I'm not mistaken, I have seen some like photos, little information online researching. And I researched this a while ago. You know, as far as even before that, like, and we'll go back to like Egyptian era, you know, ancient Greece, ancient Rome and the Roman Empire, what have you. I think they had some kind of really, you know, I guess, I don't know if we can say barbaric, but some type of boxing, I guess you can say. I don't think it was really official. And they even had like, you know, like some kind of invented glove. It wasn't even gloves. They were like casts, like, you know, casts that people get like in the, you know, when they break an arm or something. Not exactly like that, like hand wraps, but they were really hard. And they had like even some kind of brass knuckles around their knuckles, and they were, you know, people to get knocked out in the first punch. I mean, that was just barbaric and cruel, man. And you know, back in those days, you know, in ancient Rome, if I'm not mistaken, you know, the Colosseum, and you know, they just had some gruesome, you know, entertainment, man. It was just horrible. But you know, and so I mean, I've heard of that, you know. And but it has a long trajectory, man. A real long trajectory. as far as the sport of boxing is concerned. And as you said, Kurtis, it has definitely gone a long way. And, that's why we cherish the sport. And this is exactly why I want to talk about it, because it has its roots. It definitely has its roots. Real quick, Kurtis, before I go to Stormy, what ounce gloves were they using in the Broughton days? And Jack Broughton, I think you mentioned.
Yeah. Oh man, there had to be 46 ounces, man. If that, they was basically winter gloves. The leather was hard. It was a different type of leather. But I want to go back real quick what you just said, and I should have went back further.
But
back in the Rome days, they used what they call helmantes. Helmantes were leather straps on their hands.
Okay.
And before the 1600s, like you said, man been fighting since day one, basically. The basic form of self-defense is putting up both your hands, and the Greek days, the leather straps were called helmantes, so it either goes back further than 1681, but that was the first documented fight, but it goes even further back. So, I'm glad you brought that point up, Renee.
So interesting. You said that a butcher, the first documented fight was between a butcher and what? And who else? A butler?
And yes, that was the first fight on record, January 6, 1681. Most historians consider that the birth of boxing.
Wow. Now, what can you elaborate upon this topic, Stormy?
Man, Kurt laid it out. I just didn't know that Benson was back there fighting butchers back in the day, man.
Probably got mad at the meat slice, huh? Got kind of angry at the cut.
Yeah, man. But I'll tell you something. It must have been really an adrenaline rush to catch that at that time, because people as a society, we're not like today, our citizens in our society can be very aggressive, but going back in the days, it was like you had true bad boys and tough guys or whatever, but society as a whole, they kind of weren't like that. People were kind of docile. But it's like when you had something like that going, no wonder the sport really grew. And if you count back to the date that Kurt gave us, the 1660s, the sport may not have evolved very fast, but it grew very fast. So it's like, I guess that's the basic form of entertainment, watching people go at it. I guess also out of that comes the old saying, people like to watch train wrecks. Now that's not necessarily verbatim, but it's like, people want to see chaos. They want to, because it's something about the nature of the beast, being unleashed on a target, on a source, and people want to watch that. That's why people sit up and watch Wild Kingdom or something, on cable, and they watch Animals in the Wild, because there's some kind of rush that a human being gets about physical confrontation, even though they may not want to be the one being physical and confrontational, but they don't mind watching it. If two dudes got into a scrape right outside in the middle of the street in front of your house on your block, people will be looking through their blinds and everything. Nobody's gonna run out, hey guys, stop it. Less likely of that to happen than people to sit there and say, hey, come look at this. You know what I'm saying? So it's just something about us as human beings. And like I said, I can't add too much more than what Kurt added historical, but I can, offer up something as far as the psychological aspect of human confrontation, one-on-one. There's a huge adrenaline rush when it comes down to that.
Definitely, man. Definitely. Kurtis, do you remember if the first showdown official recorded boxing match, was it a paid event, or was it like public? They just anybody come in and watch, or how would that go? Do you remember?
No, it wasn't a paid event. It was just documented, and maybe a couple of people watch. It wasn't really a big deal because boxing was just getting off the ground. So it was, a lot of historians, when I read up on it, it was a baby, soon to blossom later on. But in the boxing really was huge in the 1920s. It was a first tier sport because Jack Dempsey was a bigger athlete than Babe Ruth. And then, it took off after that with Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali and Jack Johnson, because you had, he was the first black heavyweight champion. So now you had race became a big part of it because the white establishment saw it as a white sport and they wanted to keep it white, or they figure a white fighter should be champion. So when Jack Johnson came around in 1908, he like upset the apple cart.
Okay. What about Reggie? What's your input or general opinion about that? About the history, the birth of boxing and the evolution that it has had until now.
Nothing. That was a deep history lesson right there, man. I sat back and enjoyed it. But the question I had, you had asked about the first fight. I was just intrigued with hearing that history, but beginning from the 1600s and between a butcher and a butler. But was this authorized by a king, or were they on the plantation? Who put together the fight, and was it? So I'm believing it was fought on a plantation between those two. But as the sport continued, if you have the history that this guy continued to promote or try to expand these events, did he go about putting this in different venues, having paid attendees to watch these fights? And that's really kind of the question I have. I just have questions, not too much that I can input on it, because that was a deep, quick, detailed history that Kurt put out.
Now, well, Christopher Monk had power because he was politically connected. He was, like I said, the Duke of Albemarle and a lieutenant governor of Jamaica. So it was just an isolated fight that he put together. He got the ball rolling, so to speak, and then it evolved from there with different people after him. In 1738, that's when they had the first London prize rules. But 1681, it was just being born, So, when you have a sport like that, because boxing is so underhanded, you can get so much information, I'm surprised I know about, the fight from 1681, but he was not a boxing promoter. He was just politically connected. Maybe it's like a guy waking up saying, I would wonder who would win between John the Butcher and Jack the Butler. I want to see them fight, and so you just put the fight together. It was just like being on a plantation. I'm glad you mentioned that. Remember the scene in what's that? Leonardo DiCaprio Candyland.
Django.
Where when he was a powerful slave owner, he was sitting in his living room and he made the two black guys fight to the death. It's just like that. So, it was probably on a plantation, more than likely, but that's what really got the ball rolling. But James Figg, who was a bare-knuckle champion in 1719, he opened up an amphitheater and he used to teach boxing. That's boxing first superstar, because he was like undefeated from 1719 to 1730, bare knuckle. He was like the name that really I would say one of the forefathers, and he was a fighter. So, I credit him a lot as well.
There's something I would like to add also with just talking about the human nature of man again.
Go ahead.
There is something that is within us all that we have an admirable acknowledgement when somebody can physically handle themselves. Aggression against aggression. There is just something that is deep within the nature of us as human beings. And it doesn't matter who it is. It could be a white guy. It could be a black guy. It doesn't matter, you know. But when someone is physically capable, there's something about man where we find awe in that, especially if it goes beyond what we consider ourselves individually. You know, when you, because you might feel, you know, you're machismo, and you may feel that you are strong and you can, you know, lift things or carry yourself well or whatever. But there's something about seeing another human being who can just wipe somebody, you know, wipe the floor with them or whatever. It's like, I don't care if you're a boy or girl, man or woman. It's like there's something about that. And you're like, look at that guy, man. He, you know, there's something about that. And it has been there probably since man arrived on the scene. And that's why this sport, when it's done correctly, when it's promoted correctly, when the matches are made in a proper manner, the sport, there is nothing that can compare to boxing. Nothing. I don't care what type of sport you like, what you grew up playing, what you were always exposed to. If you've got boxing, when it is offering its best, there is nothing like it whatsoever.
I completely agree. Completely agree on that. Actually, you know, I want to kind of jump to a different point, but it's somewhat similar to this. Reggie, it's concerning the point we're talking about. We'll start with Reggie. So Reggie, what, like, we're talking about the beginning, the birth, right? You going back to even bare knuckle fighting, right? This is one reason, me personally, I like bare knuckle BKFC to a certain extent. I'm not I don't always watch it, but I appreciate the boxing elements in that sport. You also have BKB, bare knuckle boxing in Europe, and I appreciate the science that is implemented in that sport. And because that's where we can say, you know, that's where boxing came from, right? So I don't know, Reggie, if you know a little bit as far as like you know, at the beginning of the sport, you know, old clips of old boxing videos, you know, the black and white, you know, beginning of the 1900s, maybe even, you know, around the 1900s, the beginning. Do you see a change in or an evolution? Okay, before I ask you, Reggie, we know that everybody has their own style. I mean, that's a given. We all know that each fighter has their own style, and, you know, the way they fight in the ring, the way they have their defense, footwork, et cetera, et cetera. But like what I've noticed, I mean, Kurtis, you guys, Reggie, Stormy, you can elaborate a lot more than I can in this aspect. What I have seen, at least, is some fighters, you know, back in the day, back in the, you know, 1900s, early 1800s, what have you, or even in photos, you can see the photos, ancient photos, right? Drawings of these people squaring up. The way that they have their stance, it looks like they have their arms low, you know, defense is low. They don't have their guard up, you know, as far as we see boxing nowadays. It reminds me of Carl Froch. I guess that's a modern example. Carl Froch, or maybe a George Groves. George Groves, right? Former fighters, boxers, where, you know, George Groves would be kind of hunched over with his guard down. You know, it looks like the bare knuckle era, you know, many years ago, you know, before they actually used gloves, you know, where boxing was really birthed with gloves. It looks like they fought more like that. Okay, that's kind of what I'm getting to here. Now, Reggie, do you see or have you seen an evolution in how fighters fight from those days and now, like with styles and defense and things of that nature?
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. And I think with the old styles from what we see on film and sometimes in photos is it was more of an engaging style, a style to eliminate opposition, to go in there,
Exactly.
seek and destroy, arms low, which is in today's day and age, that ends the fight. Leaving yourself open with too many holes. I think the defensive aspects, you know, the evolution of defense is light years ahead of what you've seen back then. But like I said, back then was to engage, to get your opponent up out of there. and also when they start fighting in fans, I think it was to entertain and other things that came along with the sport. You're that machismo thing. You're the man of all men, and you're going in here to crush whoever's out there. So it wasn't none of the moving around, backing away type of things. And I don't believe they had the skill sets yet. You see a lot of the positioning of their foot. The footwork didn't seem to be there. A lot of times when guys are in trouble, they make the error that we see in today's time where if a fighter is retreating straight line, arms down, you've seen a lot of that back in the day, or turning to run away. So yeah, there's been a light year change since the bare-knuckle days to the turn of the century days, to where I see a lot of technical errors, but it was based on the skill sets that many of the fighters have there. Nobody really separate themselves, but it began to be the style, that low positioning of the arms, doing a lot of tying up. I don't know, every aspect of it changed, and a lot of, you don't see too much of the bouncing around, people utilizing that ring, moving around, changing angles. It was just getting there, bang, bang, and go to destroy the other opponent. And the other thing was, you can destroy a person. Person goes down, you're right over the top of them, trying to continue on what you did to see if you can get this guy up out of there. But and then also along with what comes out of that is the training, because a lot of these guys probably worked on farms, other things, so they weren't dedicated 24 or 365 to the sport of boxing. Many of them, like I said, they probably worked as farmers, worked in bars, did other things. And when a fight got scheduled, maybe they do a little bit of running, a little bit of lifting, nutrition, and all that stuff wasn't there. And I don't think the dedicated training or finding trainers, being how relative the sport being in its infancy still back then, that they put a lot of dedication into finding dedicated boxing trainers and stuff. So of course, through that, the evolution begins, especially when the thoughts of these business people finding lucrative ways of making money, and both for the fighters as well, whatever the fighters would get. But that's all I got on that. I want to hear from the historians.
Yeah, definitely. It seemed like that. It seemed like, the skill was lower as far as how they fought. And this is exactly why I want to bring this point up and hear from you guys, because it seems like you just said right now, Reggie, definitely. It seems like it was more like average, Joe Blow. I say it with all due respect, just like as a general name, right? John Hancock, general, normal day-to-day people, guys, workers, full-time workers, what have you, that have a trade or whatever. And they just, after work, they go and fight, It seems like what you said, they didn't have really, the whole day to dedicate themselves to the craft, right? So that's how we see a big difference with fighting styles. What about you, Stormy? What can you elaborate upon that?
What specific point you want me to elaborate on?
On fighting styles from the bare knuckle era and the early stages of boxing to now, and how they fight, their postures, defense, and things of that nature. Huh?
Well, I think I don't know which guy you can attribute it to, but the first man to ever think about stepping out of range or stepping to the side or out of the physical confrontation was a tremendous innovator, because it's just like when you used to watch, you go back and you watch or you read up on data about the Civil War and things like that, how people used to just walk into gunfire,
right,
and just like die, because there was no taking cover, there was no
right,
deflecting or having shields and stuff like that. It's like, and we're talking about man against bullets or firearms, of course, but the first fighter to ever be able to step to the side, to give an angle, to move around a little bit, maybe let the other guy tire himself out. That person, I would like to know who that was, because prior to that, the in the box thinking of just standing in there and giving as good as you got, it is something that even today, as you see it, people think safety first. they do. They kind of run around, you know, and you want them to fight you. Hey, come on, let's mix it up. You know, even the ref sometimes has to tell guys, come on, guys, let's go, you know. But back then, it was just seek and destroy. It was like people didn't take their own best interests into consideration. So to see it evolve, I don't know who it was. Maybe we should do some research on that, and maybe Kurt might even have insight. But it's like that was a tremendous thing, because now you've given the conflict a new angle, you know, and no pun intended. Because to stand, I mean, when I work with guys in the gym, and one of the floor exercises that we would do is have them walk with like a yardstick beam across their shoulders with their hands, you know, draped over it, you know, like when old days people used to carry weights or something of weighted value, and they sling it across their shoulders and they would walk with it like that. And we would walk with them like, if you step with your left foot, you turn your right hand forward. And then when you step with your right foot, you turn your left hand. That's a balance exercise, which allows a person to understand the mechanics of when you throw your punches and how you get your waist into it, how you get the leverage that comes up from the floor. So when you see fighters conducting a match, not only is there brain activity going on, right, along with the physical activity, but that elusive nature, that the person who says, I'm going to get out of way of danger, but I'm going to keep myself within range for danger to the other person. That's when the science starts. You understand? It's like, that's like you're thinking on another level. Before you were acting on a physical level.
Exactly. Yeah.
But when you want to consider taking less damage, when you want to consider inflicting more damage, when you want to consider how much power you were able to get on a certain shot because you threw it from a certain angle. See, there's a reason boxing is called the sweet science. And this is when those elements begin to come into play. So again, I would like to find out who that person was. I remember just a few weeks ago, I was watching the movie Mandingo with Ken Norton, and they were making the slaves in the film fight each other, and they just kind of went after each other in a reckless, savage manner. But at some point, someone thought of safety. You know what I mean? Not safety like protect myself, because they were in this situation where they were primarily fighting to the death, a lot of these guys, but being in a safer place than the opponent so you can inflict more damage on the opponent. And then at some point, the opponents or the losers or people who witnessed began to say, oh, he won because of this. He was doing that. You understand? Science, application. It's something to be considered in the sport, and I think is actually devalued in the sport. That's what I have to offer on that.
Definitely. Stormy, you who know a little bit more in this aspect, as far as it kind of reminds me of, kind of to parallel with it, you know, martial arts, the birth of karate, I guess, you know, and several distinct styles of martial arts, if I'm not mistaken, was birthed in Asia. Am I correct or not? As far as like where martial arts was born, you know, as far as diverse styles, and they were once, I think that, you know, because of Asian slaves, they started to learn how to defend themselves or something like that, and then it evolved.
First and foremost, boxing is a martial art. Okay, it really is. Don't separate it, because it's physical, unarmed combat. However, the original martial arts came from a dark man who wandered the deserts and everything and found himself in Asia. And along his path, he had studied animals, you know, and like we do today, and watched how they moved and everything. And he created exercises from observing these animals, you know, tigers and leopards and stuff like that. And he began to use these exercises as a common as a way of you know, physical fitness and keeping himself. So when he arrived in China and the original Shaolin Temple, when they took him in, he was showing these monks, you know, ways and manners of how he performed exercises, because those monks weren't doing those type of exercises until they ran across him. Okay, and so out of that was born animal fighting styles and everything, but they originally began as physical forms of exercise.
Wow. Wow. Man,
Because
that's awesome.
they did a lot of meditating and to develop themselves physically. So I forget his name, Bodhidharma or something like that, but that's who he was. But it was a dark man who had traveled from Africa. A lot of people want to say he traveled from the Middle East, but he came across the sands from Africa and found himself in China.
Wow, 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 wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. Kurtis, what can you say about the styles? Real quick, before we get to Kurtis, just real quick, G5, Gabe, what we're talking about here. Facts. The low guard is still common in today's time. The advanced training and athleticism saves a lot of fighters for a while until it fades, and it's solely on boxing IQ and boxing ability. Yeah, until it fades. And the thing here is that sometimes with really, really, you know, disciplined, well-trained fighters, it seems to not fade as much, you know, like in the later rounds, right? But I think that's very few and far between. You know what I mean? You don't really have many fighters nowadays that can really fight, you know, the whole 12 rounds in boxing, that can box the whole 12 rounds as if they're still fighting in the first or second, third round, you know, warming up. You know, it's really not too common to see that, because nowadays, man, we see fighters, you know, in their 10th round, they're already gassed out. They're already gasping for air. Their guard's low. They're fighting as if, you know, just as you're saying right now, Gabe, you know, they're just fighting like maybe back in the bare-knuckle era where they're just going all out. You know, they have nothing else to really depend upon. So, yeah, definitely, bro. What about you, Kurtis? What can you say about that? Like, you know, as far as the fighting styles. And real quick, I want to just chime in on this little aspect to that. This is why I personally appreciate, you know, fighters from Europe. You know, even nowadays, we still see kind of that resemblance. Not a lot, but some of the resemblance of the roots of boxing as far as styles. It's not too smart, obviously, to fight, you know, with your guard low. But I love it. I remember, you know, one of the fights in Europe that UK, whatever, right, in those areas, that really, really resonates, and I love it, and I like to see it. You know, sometimes I go and watch the fights again on YouTube. Groves, that's why I mentioned them a moment ago when we started this topic, this point. George Groves versus Carl Froch, man, those guys were going at it, man, and you know, I appreciate that, because that's just, you know, heart, you know, guts going in the ring, man, and they were just going at it, man. But you know, I don't really approve of not having the best defense, right? But you know, you kind of see it nowadays sometimes, you know, with those European fighters, not with all of them. But so what about you, Kurtis? What can you say about that with fighting styles, how they had their guard low, and other aspects that you may know about? Maybe you remember, you know, the person like Stormy B mentioned a moment ago, who was the person who started to bring that craft, that science into the ring? You know what I mean? Historically speaking, you know, where a person can now angle, slip jabs, you know, get out the way, use the footwork around the ring, et cetera, et cetera. You know, how have you seen styles evolve from the bare knuckle era, from the birth of boxing to now?
Well, you know, it doesn't contribute to one man, but 1892, when John L. Sullivan was a bare knuckle champion, he fought in a very prehistoric style, upright, you know, hands a certain way, and his mentality was, I can go to any bar or saloon and lick any son of a bitch in the house. But see, there's a fighter named James J. Corbett who brung a style that John L. Sullivan wasn't familiar with. When Sullivan was fighting other bare knuckle stars like Jack Kilrain, you know, it was mano y mano.
Yeah.
You know, both of them fought the same way. Prehistoric, no head movement, stand straight up in a robotic fashion. So when James J. Corbett, I believe, came in 1892 and beat John L. Sullivan, he was scientific because he used footwork. You know, but it went from James J. Corbett to George Dixon. George Dixon was a fighter, a black Canadian fighter who was the first black champion ever. You know, in 1890, he beat Nook Wallace. He invented shadow boxing. So see how very slowly things begin to take form and shape. You know, shadow boxing, the 1-2, hitting the bag, you know, giving angles. And even Jack Johnson, when you study him, he used to smother his opponent, walk you around, because he was a brute, you know, and he's the parry puncher. Sort of like what Mikey Garcia does now. He's a block punches with his arms and parry punches, knocks him out the way. He was an expert at that, Jack Johnson. And he would throw the right uppercut, his favorite punch. He would come underneath. You know, that's why he dominated. You know, but see, footwork, you know, see, Jack Dempsey, let me go to say Jack Dempsey was the quintessential slugger. That's why he was loved, because he was a savage. You know, became champion 1919 to 1926. He fought in that style where fans loved it. He went after his foe with reckless abandon, sort of like Manny Pacquiao does now, Aaron Pryor. You know, people always gravitate to the Mike Tysons of the world, you know, but boxing is a science. There's always somebody that's going to offset that Jack Dempsey type of style, and his name was Gene Tunney. Gene Tunney was very scientific because not only he had fast footwork, he had educated footwork. And when he beat Dempsey in 1926, he was hated for it. You know, and remember, the Irish wasn't always treated fairly before they was accepted being white. So Gene Tunney was an Irishman, and he was hated by America for beating their beloved champion. You know, because he brought a style that was totally unfamiliar to the boxing public. You know, when Jack Dempsey beat the hell out of Jess Willett, it's probably the worst beating in boxing history, and those gloves was loaded. He broke ribs, he broke Willett's jaw, he knocked some teeth out because they had a bet that Dempsey would knock out Willett in the first round. I mean, he beat the hell out of Willett, man. You know, but they love Jack Dempsey bravado, testosterone, just this all-out brawling techniques. But you know, very slowly, the science of boxing started to evolve, and you have fighters like Gene Tunney, you know, and before him, James J. Corbett, and then you had the Harry Graves of the world, who's probably the best white fighter ever. Harry Graves was special. You know, he was a boxer. Johnny Dundee, you know, who could fight against the ropes. These were the early scientific fighters, Jack Johnson, you know, and then, you know, you had the Benny Leonards, and you know, then you had the Billy Kahns. So you know, as the years passed on, because Joe Louis had problems with boxers because he was a puncher, a beautiful puncher, but he had problems with boxers like Jersey Joe Walcott and Billy Kahn. You know, people like that. You know, he lost to Rocky Marciano, but he was done after that. You know, but you know, then it got. You know, you see the evolution of scientific fighters. You know, you seen the Charlie Burleys, who was the face of Black Murderers Row. You see the, you know, Ezra Charles and the Archie Moore, who used to, you know, have the cross arms defense. You know, when you have that eye for boxing, you can see the little things that a fighter does. You know, and that's one of my gifts, that I could see what was going to happen before it happens. You know, I was always good at predicting fights. I'm not Nostradamus, but, you know, most of the times I get it right. And this is the evolution all throughout the years. It's like picks up momentum like a snowball going downhill. You know, collects snow and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But there's always been a science of boxing, but the styles like Jack Dempsey and John L. Sullivan and Joe Louis, people gravitated towards them because they fight straight ahead, standing straight up, throwing punches, trying to get you out of there. But all three of them men had either problems with boxers or they lost to scientific fighters. And you still see it when you see fighters like
Exactly.
Mayweather and Pernell Whitaker and Sugar Ray Robinson. They fought with a science, and that style can offset a brawling type of style, like Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield. And let me just say that, you know, um, boxing as a science is how you supposed to fight. Now a lot of fighters don't have those genetics where they can slip punches, they can fight backing up, sideways. It takes a very special person to do that. You look at brawlers who are not just dumb, and I don't like to say the word dumb because anybody that climbs in that ring got to have heart, you got to be smart. But take somebody like Julio Cesar Chavez, who was a brawler, but he was a different type of brawler. He worked both sides of the body and he could break you down. What I'm talking about, all you have to do is go look at when he fought Edwin Chopper Rosario. He was the different type of brawlers. You have different levels of brawling and you have different levels of scientific boxing.
Awesome. I want to kind of piggyback. All right. Yeah, I want to kind of piggyback off a little bit what Stormy was saying. I'm sorry, Kurtis was saying. I want to throw this to Reggie real quick. Reggie, all that Kurtis was explaining right now as far as the evolution of styles, right? And I don't know why I was reminded right now of Sullivan when Kurtis was describing Sullivan, how he got beat by James J. Corbett, right? And through footwork, because James started using footwork, how he elaborated upon that. Awesome breakdown. Yeah, how Sullivan was a stiff fighter, right? Stiff fighter. Stormy, was his neck stiff also? Sullivan's when he fought? Yeah, Kurtis, real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. Was Sullivan's neck kind of stiff also when he fought?
Yeah, he was. He fought straight up, no head movement, because that's the only way he know how. Chin up in the air. It was about him posing his will on you than being scientific.
Yeah, you just complimented what I was thinking, that chin up in the air. I was kind of reminded of Ryan Garcia to a certain extent. Not exactly, right? But yeah, that chin up in the air, kind of stiff, just throwing flurries. Yeah, so now this is kind of why I want to go. Reggie, real quick, Reggie. Do you see this kind of piggybacking off what Kurtis said? Because it just came to mind, great information here. Reggie, do you think that a student, okay, we're talking about pro fighters right now. You got the Errol Spences, you got the, Caleb Plants, the Benavidez, right? Et cetera, Canelo, all these fighters right now, Bud, et cetera. The list goes on and on. Okay. Do you think these fighters, being students of what we're talking about right now, historic styles in fighting, do you think they can be better fighters by being students of historic fighting, Reggie?
Yeah, I think you do got to pay attention to the historics. And even if you can go back and find film to where you can find things that you can tune and tweak. You can find mistakes. You can find what was good, what was bad. And from that, as time goes on, you're supposed to have continuous improvements on things. And that's some of the things they can look at. They can do comparative styles to what they do and look at their fights and see what's ineffective, along with seeing what was ineffective about the olden era and understanding why people fought in those styles. And it was probably due to the levels of training, the time, dedication that they put in, going way back in eras and into now. But I think they can learn a lot, but I think more the learning comes probably towards this middle of the 19th century, what the 60s or 70s. I always hear the OG speaking about the golden era. I think those are the better periods of studying versus going way back into the 1910s. I think when they had better teaching. And I think that's the period in which you look at, because we kind of going back through, I think life has these cycles to where you always hear about sometimes you return back at where you came from. And I think that's where we're returning back to where we came from, because you hear commonly where it's spoken of, there's a lack of training, a lack of teachers within the sport. And so now the sport has returned back to this 1920s type era. The 60s and 70s, these guys came out of great programs. You had the great legendary teachers back then. You coming into today, people are taught by their fathers who read books, or maybe some of them had the eye, but they're not properly teaching everything within the sport. So that's why you come back where you're seeing young fighters who have many holes in their game, standing straight up, leaving their hands down, walking straight back, not stepping over, not doing all these things, because a lot of the tools are missing as we go back through this 360-degree process in which people return to, because they're not studying the history and they're not studying the game. And that's what happened. You don't study, you don't observe, you repeat, and then we're repeating things. So that's my thought on that.
I think it's interesting because the last session that we had, the last show that we had in this series, I think Reggie was talking about this, breaking down something interesting. You mentioned something last show amongst the many things we're talking about, but I remember you mentioning Andre Ward. I think Andre Ward right now, he's starting like a type of school of training. I think he's publicizing it on Twitter and social media. I think he's going to launch some kind of teaching, training school for fighters. I think he's one of the few that is trying to teach fighters to be students of the game. You know what I mean? Stormy, do you know of any names now? He just went to drink some water. He came back real quick now. Stormy, do you know of any modern day fighters right now that are students of, what we're talking about right now, maybe even golden era boxing, students of fighters in that era where they learn off of them, learn from them? Have you heard any fighters nowadays, speaking of that, mentioning legendary fighters from before and where they're learning from them?
Not amongst the current crop of youth that are active today. Most recent memory takes me to the guys like Bernard Hopkins and James Toney. Two guys that really off the top of my head who not only embodied that, but there is history there where the coaches that work with them and introduce them to what came before and why what came before was successful and how it could be advantageous for them. James Toney, you could put one of his fights on and just put it in black and white, and you'll see him as one of the fighters of yesteryear. Bernard Hopkins had a great deal of that as well. As Reggie and yourself, Renee Box Young, were talking just a moment ago, I was reflecting on Roy Jones Jr., who was the guy touted as the fighter of the 90s. Now, for him to be considered the fighter of the entire decade of the 90s is a great accomplishment within itself. But imagine if he had great boxing technique too. Then they would probably be able to associate his name along the lines of someone like Sugar Ray Robinson or something like that. But Roy Jones was not a great boxer. He was a great athlete, a tremendous fighter who had tremendous athleticism. And it came back to haunt him in the later portions of his career when his athletic gifts and advantages began to wane, and he slowed down just enough for people to catch up to him. And it's another reason why when he fought Bernard Hopkins in their rematch, Bernard was able to beat him. Bernard used his moxie, his guile, plus his boxing technique and lessons that he learned from originally fighting Roy Jones over 10 years earlier, and he bested Jones. But why shouldn't Jones, who 10 years older, be able to use boxing skill to still take care of Bernard Hopkins? Because it wasn't there, you see? And when you look at a guy like Hopkins, who was able to fight to 50 years old, I mean, in this era, you understand, that's an accomplishment. But it also serves for who brought him along. And the trainers and coaches that worked with him, they were able to pass on a great deal of knowledge that he retained. Remember, he stayed in shape and ruled the middleweight division for a very long time. The man walked around with a 32-inch waist. He kept his weight. He did all of the things he's supposed to do, and he reaped the benefits successfully in the ring. Now, James Toney was a different person as far as his, you know, his approach to the sport. He ate himself out of his best weight class and everything, but it still didn't take away from the fact that he could compete. He was in there knocking out Vladimir Klitschko in sparring. You understand? James Toney, 5 foot, what, 9, 11, knocking out Klitschko in sparring. Wow. Think about that for a moment. And beating everybody from pillar to post. It's like sparring with Gerald McClellan. You know, they had wars in the gym, but he's a throwback, a true throwback. He beat my favorite fighter, Evander Holyfield. Took him apart like you take apart a puzzle.
Man,
you see, that's skill. James Toney is the kind of guy he could probably fight till he's 80 years old because he can fight. He know angles. He know punches. He know how to move. He know how to take a punch. He know how to give a punch. He is a complete book. And he talks very confident and assured because he knows he's got that in his back pocket. When he speaks and he's talking stuff, it's because he's confident. He's assured. You know, it's not bravado. And when guys are capable like that, you could throw back the old fighters, they were all like that. Some had more engaging personalities than others, but they knew that they were capable and they could handle themselves. Archie Moore, perfect example. Just like James Toney, Archie Moore, that's the cloth that Toney is from, because Archie fought well into his elder years. And Kurt can tell you exactly how long, but he was capable. You know, he was way older than Rocky Marciano when he fought him. Could you imagine if he was Rocky Marciano's age when he fought Rocky? He would have knocked Rocky out. But that's what it is. When you talk about these guys of today, they're none of them right now. You might have some young guys that are like still haven't had double figures in fights yet or whatever, who might be trying to study or whatever. But most of the fighters of today, they've adopted a total different formula. And the formula that they're adopting is not built to last. They're going to have to go back and do what was done before. This new way and new age, it's not going to work out for them. If you saw the movie Creed 2, when Rocky Balboa took young Creed to Mexico and took him down there where the old fighters were and everything, and started teaching him the old techniques and refined him and made him a different type fighter, that even though that's a scripted film, right? But the principle is appropriate. Basically, you have to dial it back and go back to the basics.
Right.
You have a stronger consternation with your foundation of your basics, they can carry you through anything.
Amazingly said. There's a fighter that came to mind. He's a prospect in the heavyweight division. I don't know if anyone remembers or knows about this guy. He posts a lot of stuff on Instagram, and I followed him a little bit before he was a pro boxer. I think he did some kickboxing, MMA, things along that nature. Now he's a pro boxer, heavyweight division. He kind of reminds me. He has that little style, kind of a Mike Tyson style. Left and right, left and right, left and right, boom, boom. James Wilson. Have you heard of him? Have any of you guys heard of him? Heavyweight prospect.
Yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah, James Wilson. He's one of the few, I guess we can say, who is learning from Tony, from Mr. Tony. Stormy B was talking about him right now. That from James Toney, he was training James Wilson some time ago. There was some video footage on him training him, and I think he's one of the few fighters. Kurtis, do you know? Same question that I asked Reggie and Stormy. Do you know of any modern day fighters who are actually students of vintage boxing, students of the golden era fighters? That will benefit them now?
Oh Yes, Ryan Garcia, and I'm gonna tell you why, and Canelo, and
Oh,
I'm gonna explain. When I was very shocked and pleased when Ryan Garcia, during his interview, when he knocked out Dano with a left hook, he said, "Yeah, that was my Sugar Ray Robinson left hook," and I said, "Whoa!" I was very surprised,
mm-hmm.
and that tells me he's listening and watching and learning from older fighters. That's what he said in the interview. That was and it was when Sugar Ray Robinson knocked out Gene Fulmer. It was the same left hook that Ryan Garcia caught Duno with. He said that was my Sugar Ray Robinson left hook, and I was
Wow.
very pleased. So, he's adopting the spirit of a fighter. This is very important now. Not physically, we know he can fight physically, but psychologically and his spirit, emotionally, he's watching these guys because Canelo Alvarez has a huge picture of Muhammad Ali where he trains at,
Mm.
and it covers the whole wall. And there was a picture, right, of a fighter. It was a black fighter, and in Spanish, Reynoso and them, they was all training. He was helping Canelo with the gloves, and Reynoso said, "That's Sugar Ray Robinson." So Canelo was very upset because he shrugged his shoulders like, "I should have known that," because Canelo changed his style. Look at Canelo before Mayweather and after Mayweather. He has upper body movement. He fights more of American tradition. He'll mix it up with Mexican style and American, whatever. He's very smart. He doesn't get enough credit for that. He's very smart. And he studies a lot. He used to wear Muhammad Ali. He still does probably Muhammad Ali T-shirts. He's a huge fan of Muhammad Ali. The reason I brought this up is that he respects older fighters. I don't hear too many of the current fighters who talks about old fighters. Bernard did, like Stormy said. He broke it down very well. But those are the two fighters that I heard and always speaks on older fighters and mention their names. But when you look at Canelo, he's very seasoned, and for him to change his style like that, that means that he must have studied these fighters, and I know he does. Not only that, but him and Lomachenko, they live like fighters supposed to live, clean. I know he got caught with some stuff, but his he has a good head on his shoulders, and Lomachenko does too. Lomachenko is always alone. He even dresses like a old school fighter. With the apple hats and the cardigan sweaters. You can't be neck deep in hip hop culture and be a fighter. And I'm talking about Tank Davis.
Mm.
Tank Davis can fight, man. He's only 60%, and it's up to him if we're going to see a 90 or 100% Tank Davis. Because if he hones his skill like the old fighters used to do, the Ezra Charles and the Archie Moores, and the Jersey Joe Walcott, I'm not saying Tank is up there with them, but you're supposed to maximize your talent and your ability, because that's what Mayweather did. And a lot of people don't talk about it. He had natural skills, but he maximized his ability because he was always in great shape mentally and more important, physically and psychologically. You know, and when you go into a fight, that's the way you're supposed to be. You don't supposed to have that the whole city of Baltimore and your locker room. And when you look at Tank's locker room, it's like 30 or 40 people in there, all in a circle. That's a no-no. Distractions and
Right, right.
all kinds of stuff. And I go back to Deontay Wilder when he was hugging up on his wife. She's not supposed to be in there right before the fight. You're supposed to go over the game plan with
Right,
your
right.
team. That's it. You don't supposed to have your shoulder lean up, your head against her shoulder like that. I didn't like that. But it's a lot to go into it, Renee. But Tank Davis and Charlo, because Charlo's going to fight Deverchenko, and I don't like the way Charlo been looking. I mean, he's been fighting people like Dennis Hogan and Brandon Adams, and he better bring his A game because there's being upset, but because the older fighters, if they lost, they just lost to a better fighter. But it was no excuses about my weight or I had personal issues going outside the ring. They didn't allow that to happen. So that's the biggest difference between old fighters and young fighters, and young fighters not mentioning the fighters of yesteryear.
Yeah, I think it's really important, man, that fighters nowadays learn, from old school fighting, from vintage day, glory day, golden age, golden era fighting. And James Wilson is one of those too. Like I said, I mentioned, I repeat, James Wilson, heavyweight division. I think if I'm not mistaken, he's in Golden Boy, man. And that's another controversial thing right there, man. I kind of hope that he gets his name, get a name for himself and then get out of Golden Boy and just become a free agent. I think he's going to do amazing, man. Just keep an eye out for him, you guys. James Wilson. And like I said, James Toney was training him, and he looks promising. And he looks like one of those, just like what Kurtis Anderson is saying right now. James Wilson, he looks like one of those fighters, man, that in between fights, he's just training. He's teaching his kids. He has that culture. He has that culture of fighting, staying focused 100. I mean, I don't trust in always like on what people post all the time on social media and stuff. But you can tell, man, this guy, he's bringing up his kids in this. I mean, man, seems like he just lives in the gym, man. I mean, this guy he looks really promising. And the reason why I mention him is because, it correlates to what what Kurtis is saying, that, how Ryan Garcia, Canelo, they're they have their mind, Lomachenko, et cetera, et cetera. There's a select few, I have to say, because I mean, the majority aren't, right? Who are really focused on the golden, era of fighting and that mindset, right? That mindset and learning from them. Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody here, one of you guys, did Floyd Mayweather used to do that? I thought he did. I think he was one of those types also, Floyd Mayweather Jr. I'm talking about. I think he used to study also fighters from back in the day. Did he? Or is it just me? Because I thought I saw him, on a clip some time ago, him like sitting there and studying older fighters. Am I mistaken or not?
Well, he didn't. He was around fighters like Frankie Randall and Pernell Whitaker. That's what helped Floyd Mayweather. That was his connection with the older fighters. I never seen him sit down and study film.
Okay.
But amateur, he always been around boxing. That's what helped him. His fathers, his uncles. Right. He come from a fighting family, sort of like the Garcias. It has a weird way of rubbing off on a fighter. He was around David Tua. People don't know Frankie Randall used to take care of Mayweather, buy him CD Walkmans and clothes, and plus he used to spar Pernell when he was 16 years old. So that kind of helped him, sort of like Shakur Stevenson is around Andre Ward and Terrence Crawford.
Right.
So that's the connection with the older fighters.
Right. Let me get real quick to the chat. And you just to salute everyone that's coming in the building, that has been in the building. You know what I mean? Let me go back just real quick, which is surprising. George Diaz, salute. He's from the South. Also, he's down here. He's actually a coworker. Much love to him, man. Thank you so much for tuning in. G5 Gabe, thank you so much. I think already mentioned Bruce Goes, D-Style Boxing. Salute, brother. I want to get to the comments because, they're saying some good stuff right here. D-Style, G-Funky, thank you so much for coming in the building. Thank you so much, Lawrence Williams. Also, what's good, brother? What is good? We also got D Hodges also is in the house, man. Bruce Goes says something interesting. I'm hearing a lot of knowledge in the house. Definitely, man. We're learning from the OGs here, man. Learning from Reggie, learning from the brothers here. Man, I love it. G-Style says something also. I did karate for like 10 years. Wow, man, that's awesome. I didn't know that. D Hodges, yeah, what's up, Renee, right? Chat, LDBC, LDBC, thank you. Salute family, thanks so much, man, for tuning in. Thank you for shouting out. We have here someone, I think it was... Let me get down here. It was D-Style Boxing. Groves did good versus Froch till he got tired. Yeah, Groves got tired out, and Froch just went in for the kill, man. He just went in for the kill there. bit more right here. Let's see what he says. Yeah, he was schooling Froch in first fight till ran out of gas. So I want to go down to what? Okay, Brusco says here, Mike Tyson even had the Jack Dempsey haircut. yeah, right. You're right. Lawrence Williams, Jojo Diaz has done pretty well with his pops being a novice trainer. Oh, okay. I didn't know his dad was a novice trainer. All right. Jones was never the same after Tarver KO. Okay. And then we have, there's lots of chats here, guys. I just want to get to some of these things. Malik Scott, he speaks on growing up in Philly and being around trainer Fred Jenkins and fighters like David Raid and Rockin' Rodney Moore. Awesome. He continues to explain Malik will be Wilder's new head coach and bring something different because he's a student. Okay, real quick, you guys. That's why I want to go to these chats, these comments. Malik, do anybody you guys know about him?
Yeah, I know Malik Scott well.
I personally agree, Lawrence, that with Lawrence in the sense that for Wilder getting this coach and bringing something different, because I personally think if he's going to fight in the trilogy, if they're going to do this trilogy with Tyson Fury, man, I think, Wilder has it. He just has to bring something new, right? Not just depend on that power, not just depend on 1-2s, bring something a little bit more dynamic in the ring. And I think he can take Tyson Fury out. Definitely, man. I've seen fights. He continues to say, I've seen fights with Canelo when he was that upper body defense before the Floyd. And the Trout fight Canelo defense was on point. Okay. Awesome. That's right on. Agree 100%. Hamza S. I didn't see you, bro. Thanks so much for tuning in, man. Thank you so much. Agree 100%. I didn't like how his wife was all, with Wilder. Yeah. I love Wilder, man. But yeah, that another thing too. Concerning this, what we're talking about right now, man. Fighters have to be focused, especially before they fight, going over the game plan like Curtis was explaining. If I'm not mistaken, some time ago, man, Wilder was in an interview. I think I mentioned this some time ago with Curtis, I think in another live we had, that he talked about having relations with his wife before a fight, man. It's like, oh, dude, no. So, some things that Wilder can improve on in these aspects. And, I'm sure he will before the trilogy, at least. I'm sure he's going to be really focused this time, this to come around. We're going to have a new Wilder in the ring right there, man. Malik Scott gave James Wilson some boxing knowledge and good sparring. Don't sleep on what Malik will bring to Wilder. I hope not, man. I won't sleep, man. I hope he does really bring new things for Wilder, man. I got my hopes high for Wilder. Definitely. Gil Clancy was good at keeping his fighters focused. All right. Now let's get to another. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to chime back on a comment a moment ago about Wilder and his woman being in the dressing room and all of that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Having relations before the fight and all of that.
Right.
Listen, no one ever said it was something wrong with having relations with a woman before you get ready to fight, having her in your dressing room before you get ready to fight. However, when you dial it back to the old school way of doing things, it is the fact that you deny yourself the pleasures, the enjoyments, the comforts of your life outside of boxing, which make you focus in. When you deny yourself and you discipline yourself from having the everyday enjoyments, that's what makes you reach for a higher goal. You understand? If you're gonna bring all of that into what you normally do, then what do you have to fight for? What do you have to reach for? What do you have to have your edge on for? It doesn't exist because you haven't denied yourself anything. You haven't sacrificed anything. You understand? It's like eating pie in the bed, huh? You eating pie in the bed and you just set the dish on the floor and roll over and go to sleep. What the hell is that? That's a slob. You see?
Yeah.
You eat at the dinner or dining table, clean up behind yourself, and then you don't just go lay right down. You allow your meal to digest and everything. But the point is, there is a reason. There is a method to what's considered madness for some. And in this case, we're talking about Wilder. See, he's going to have to deny himself things. He's going to have to make it where, you know what? I ain't doing all of this work for nothing. You understand? There is a payoff at the end of this. When you get comfortable, it's hard to feel that way. That's why fighters like Ali and Larry Holmes were able to achieve the heights that they did, because they didn't fight for comfort and money. They fought to be the best and to disprove anyone who wanted to challenge that. Very few have that in them, but that's what separates the real greats from those who were good.
Most definitely, man. I want to kind of shift the topic point. This is one of the bullet points that I sent some weeks ago. Actually, I think it was in the first show of the series, or the second. We didn't get a time to get around it. Reggie, I want to go with you first, Reggie. Now we're talking about, right, those vintage days of boxing and now different aspects. But I want to kind of shift to this. I didn't send this bullet point. I didn't send the bullet point, but it's something I'm sure you guys know about. Okay, real quick, okay, before we get to the last point. Now, when you go back to the fighting, right, you go back to the Sugar Ray Robinson days, Muhammad Ali, when footage was black and white, you go back even more, way back then. I remember we're seeing some clips from back in the day, man, where the commentators didn't really speak much. You just saw the fight, and, the commentators would say just one or two things, between round, during the round. And it was just mostly just the fight, man, kind of quiet. You could just hear the crowd. And in those days, recordings of fighting and events, this is where I'm getting at here. The punches, okay. Now, the equipment and the technology in those days wasn't the best, obviously, compared to now, as far as, technological advances with recording, microphones, and things of that nature. The footage. Okay, so boxing of those days, events recorded in black and white. We're talking about, more than 100 years ago. We're in 2020. Yeah, about more than 100 years ago. You can hear the punches. This is what I'm getting at. And the microphones were set in areas, right, where you can still hear the punches with those microphones of those days. Reggie, this is where I want to get at here. Reggie, do you think that, like, the fights in those days, fighters punched harder? Because I remember watching recently some Sugar Ray Robinson videos, man, some complete fights. And you can hear those punches. It's like, wow. And right now, okay, now that we're in this quarantine, whatever, right? Pandemic, it's getting, whatever. Boxing is back. Okay. No crowd. You can hear the punches more. Obviously, the cameras are now angled better. I guess, I assume they're angled in a better position, a little bit closer to the ring, things of that nature, surrounded in certain, put in strategic areas where you can hear, the grunts and the punches more from fighters, the breathing and things of that nature, right? You can hear the punches a lot more, a lot clearer. But when you compare how you can hear punches now in fights and events where you have a crowd or you don't have a crowd, it seems like you can hear them a lot more. But in those days of black and white footage, you can still hear the punches. So I kind of came to the conclusion of, man, if you can hear the punches with that kind of technology and footage that they had, recording instruments that they had in those days, you can still hear the punches. And that, it seems to me that they punched a lot harder. That's what I'm getting at here. Reggie, what do you think about that? Do you think they punched harder back in those days compared to now?
That I don't know. I think that I do not know. I think as you move in time, people become bigger, stronger, faster.
Right.
And you're speaking with the black and white era. I'm thinking like 50s, 60s era and all that stuff, compared to like fighters in the 80s and all that stuff, where you still had properly trained fighters, and even until kind of early 2000s. I think these modern fighters may have punched harder than those dudes. That's what I'm gonna go off of. And they're wearing bigger and more protective gloves. But I think what you speaking on hearing the sound, I think more maybe the microphones are brought down to kind of pick up on that sound. And I think as we go into the more modern age, things shifted away from wanting to record those type of sounds, because we don't get to hear a lot of what fighters are saying inside the ring. You hear more of the play-by-play commentary. So a lot of that focus on wanting to hear the impact of the punches is so much not there, because you got these guys at the commentating booth telling viewers what they're seeing and giving a rundown on everything that's happening. So it's not so much of picking up or recording sounds inside of the ring. You only get the inside of the ring during the 1 minute breaks. But I think if it's true with that bigger, stronger, faster, is humans develop and start to evolve, which the evolution process is probably slower than that. But you got all the scientific stuff that these guys are taking, the supplements, the weight training, other type of training and conditioning is going to make these guys stronger and faster than those guys in time. And as you look at sports in general, you see guys jumping higher, running faster. You look at track and field, record-setting times are always broken. Sometimes they may remain for 20 and something years, but you got to also keep an ideal. There's stuff being put in these guys' bodies that are going to make them bigger, stronger, faster than people of the past. Things aren't clean. So I think these guys, as time moves on, that these guys currently may be harder punches than those in the past. But I'll go ahead and pass it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking, because it makes you think, you know what I mean? I personally thought, but maybe I'm wrong. That's why I want to ask this and see what you guys think about it, that I personally thought that they hit harder before, because you can still hear the punches with that kind of, you know, technology and recording instruments they had. But maybe I'm wrong, right? Kurtis, what do you think about it?
Well, I have to respectfully disagree with my brother Reggie Owens. I thought the fighters of the past hit harder. Fighters like Joe Louis, Bob Satterfield, Sonny Liston, Jack Dempsey, you know, Rocky Marciano, even Sugar Ray Robinson. Remember, he had over 100 knockouts. Fighters like Sandy Sattler had 103 knockouts in 13 years. Sugar Ray Robinson had over 100 knockouts. Henry Armstrong had over 100 knockouts. Those guys, you know, people will say today's athletes are bigger and stronger, but to me, the athletes of yesteryear were tougher as men, and this is more important than anything. The character of a man, because the boxing ring, the square circle, as I call it, is a truth serum. Because if I was going to war, I would want fighters of yesteryear. I would share a foxhole with them than fighters today. You know, fighters back then were men. They will oppose their will on you, and the technique were better, because Joe Louis wasn't a big guy, 200-pounder, 212, 205. His technique was beautiful, short, beautiful punches. He was the master of the 6-inch punch. You know, he had a lot of knockouts where when he hit a fighter, he would spin them around. They would do funny things. You know, that was Joe Louis. You know, fighters today are big. Look at Tyson Fury, he's 6'9". But a fighter before that wouldn't bother a heavyweight. They would just come right to Tyson Fury. And because those fighters back then, they threw a lot of punches and they were in better shape. But it's the character of a fighter that made them a better fighter. The character of a man made them a better boxer more than anything. You know, like Joe Louis, when he got knocked out by Max Schmeling, he didn't change his style. He changed his attitude. He says, I'm going to get him before I get me. And come December 19th, Wilder has to do the same thing. The fighters was always prepared, you know, the great fighters. But I just got a respect for the older fighters, you know, because if you can take those old fighters and put them in a ring today, they will clean the new fighters out. I mean, you know, and I'm talking about people like Jake LaMotta. He will beat the hell out of Charlo. You know why? Because he wouldn't stop punching. And Jake LaMotta didn't hit hard, but he was relentless. His mind, you know, I got to beat this guy. That was his mentality. Can you imagine Earl Spence or Terrence Crawford fighting Sugar Ray Robinson at welterweight? you know,
Wow.
or the light heavyweight division facing Archie Moore, you know, and Ezra Charles and all them guys, they would get knocked out, these new guys. It would not be a contest. That's all I have
Now,
to say.
yeah. Stormy, what do you think? Did they hit? Do you think they hit harder, or because I'm honestly, I mean, you know, I that's how I base myself off it, and what Kurtis was saying right now, what Reggie was also saying. I mean, I balance both. What do you think, Stormy?
Shout out to Hamza S. He says they hit harder in the past because the technique was better and the
Okay.
trainers were better. And
Absolutely.
there's your answer right there, Renee Boxyoung. Because today, guys are allowed to do as they will when they come in the gym. The trainers, the guy comes in and he's fighting with his right hand forward. Okay, he's a southpaw. A guy comes in and he's fighting with his left hand forward. Okay, he's orthodox. They're not looking into who they have, what they have, how to teach them and cultivate what they may have. What happened in the past was the emphasis was on teaching. If you're taught how to do something correctly, you rarely have to change. You just heard Kurt Sugar say, Joe Louis didn't change his style against Smelling. He changed his mind. Okay, he changed his mindset. And that made all the difference in the world. We spoke on that fight recently on the Three Wise Men of Boxing. And I remarked how Joe went out there and made sure he cut the distance down on Schmeling. Yeah, Schmeling took advantage in the first fight of his low left and everything. But when you cut the distance down, remember, speed can only be measured over a distance that it travels. But if speed doesn't have distance to travel, what happens? It's smothered. But power with proper leverage and technique can be executed from close range. Okay? It doesn't necessarily need distance. There are martial arts technique that can show you. You remember Bruce Lee had a 1-inch punch.
Right.
Okay? So 1 inch. Now, Joe Louis was knocking people out with 6-inch punches. So was Sugar Ray Robinson. Imagine Joe Louis mastering the 1-inch punch. Think about that for a moment. So it's about technique. And guess where technique comes from? Teaching. So the guys of today, hell no, they don't hit harder. People are larger, but that's genetics through the transition of generations and also what we're putting in our bodies out of our food chain. There are all these supplements and the different steroids and additives and preservatives and things that they do to us. And it also mutates us. You got teenagers with beards now. Huh? That was a rare thing when I was a teenager for a dude to have a beard. Now almost every young man has a beard. 13 years old, got whiskers. Huh? So when you think about it, no, they're not hitting harder today. They were hitting harder yesterday, and they were hitting more efficiently and effectively yesterday and with proper technique. You know, bones break at 8 pounds pressure. Okay. So a 6-inch punch thrown with so many PSI, you can break, if not shatter, a jaw or chin. Think about it. How many guys out there today are being busted up that way? No, they're being busted up today because you got guys cheating and doing stuff with their hand wraps and gloves and things like that. Not because they punch greatly. The last great puncher that we can think about right now, people often harken back to Julian Jackson, if not Gerald McClellan. So think about that. There's not a lot of it in today's sports, but at the same time, men who punch with that same propensity of a Julian Jackson or Gerald McClellan, they existed back in the old days. Huh? A lot of them never got a chance to become champions. They would be champions today, dominant champions, because if they didn't have anything, they had their technique and the tools that they learned through their experiences. Right now, it's just not happening. And I am still going to bang that drum until it begins to change. Training of today has fallen off tremendously. So no, they're not hitting harder today.
Interesting, interesting. And now to get to one of these last bullet points, okay, the last bullet point that I have here, rounds, okay, the number of rounds, all right, in fighting nowadays compared to the number of rounds before, okay. Reggie, generally speaking, maybe you can point out a little bit on this, with the amount of rounds, okay. As far as you can go back, as far as with what you know, because you have been recently, or you commonly do that in your channel more than anything. You put a mix of everything, but like with fights that the fights that you comment on, it's vintage fighters, vintage fighting and events. What are the rounds that like the most rounds, the event with the most rounds that you have seen? That's kind of what I want to ask. What fight do you remember as far as vintage fighting and boxing? What fight do you remember had the most rounds? Is it up to only 15, or have you seen a fight that has more rounds than that?
No, from the ones I've been able to pull, it's only been 15. But I know the Jack Johnson, they're going like 20 rounds, probably more than that. But I don't think they fought like the traditional 3-minute round. So I'm thinking the 15-round fights is the most that I've seen from the ones that I've covered. And I think back then, I don't know how rounds went back then. I don't know if a person got knocked down or if they fought on the timer and they gave them breaks. I don't know how that was structured back then, but the 15-round fights is the ones that I've seen the most of any set of rounds that I've seen. So, but 15 is about the longest I've called on the channel, because I think I did a Jack Johnson fight, but it wasn't a full fight. It was broken down and put into highlighted clips just based on the camera technology they had back then. So whoever pieced it together, chopped it up, but I didn't get an accurate detail on what round they were in. So I just had to call the fight.
Yeah, you posted, you were calling recently and commentating on a fight with the heavyweight Spinks versus, who was it? Was it Spinks?
Yeah, Spinks and Larry Holmes.
Yeah, and I wanted that caught my attention because the fights that you put there and post there, man, they're awesome, great wars, and those guys, man, they went all 15 in a heavyweight round, heavyweight fight, 15 rounds. It's like, man, those guys were beasts. Those guys were gladiators, man, and that's why I want to talk about this point, because those guys were going all the way. Yes, they were tired and stuff, but they kept on going. I mean, wow, the stamina, the strength, the endurance. How much sweat were they? I mean, how much liters of ounces of sweat was draining out of their bodies throughout that fight. My gosh, the conditioning. Nowadays, man, fighters who can go that long, it would be a miracle. Okay, so now, Kurtis, what do you know of how many rounds? I remember watching what was it? This is weeks ago, man. I saw a fight. I forgot their names, man. All due respect. I'm sorry, I forgot their names, but I remember. But some guy, a heavyweight, got knocked out by another heavyweight in round 25. I think, I don't even remember, man. And the rounds went so long. Kurtis, do you remember how much rounds did a fight go back in those days? What was like the maximum?
Well, the longest boxing match in history was 1893, April 6th, between Andy Bowen and Tom Burke in New Orleans. It went 110 rounds. Oh
my gosh, man.
Yeah,
Wow.
they one of the fighters couldn't continue. I believe it was Tom Burke, if I'm not mistaken. He retired on his stool after. No. I think it was a no decision because they couldn't continue. That was 110 rounds. Adwall Gas, great lightweight, knocked out on Badland Nelson in the 40th round. I think Corbin knocked somebody out in the 61st round. So it was a variety number of rounds. This is history, though. And then what I know as a kid was 15 rounds until Dooku Kim died in the ring against Ray Boom Boom Mancini in 1982, and they reduced it to 12 rounds. But 15 rounds is basically the set number of rounds that it should be until they change the rules. This is going back, though, but It's crazy how two human beings can fight that long. But I just remember 15 rounds as a kid when I got into boxing at the age of 7.
Just real quick, Curtis, before we go to Stormy, when you're talking about that, that fight that was the most recorded rounds, 100, how many? 110 rounds?
110 rounds.
Were they? I mean, I don't mean to disrespect at all anything. It just makes you think, like, man, that's like superhuman strength, dude. Were they juicing, or was there any kind of no?
Nope, no juicing whatsoever.
Man.
All the food was better. They was better trained. A lot of those fighters just genetically was superior to the fighters now. I mean, Stormy broke it down a few minutes ago, but those fighters of yesteryear, they were in tremendous shape, man, because when you talk about the great fighters, most of them come from the South. Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, Henry Armstrong, I'm going on, Joe Frazier. You eat better, you didn't have sugar, you didn't have saturated fats and foods. You didn't eat just to be eating. What we do now, gluttony. Those guys was just better trained, and their bodies were in top physical condition.
I was thinking that too, that, a lot of it is the nutrition. Now we have a lot of, it's controversial, obviously. I'm sure, Reggie knows a lot about this aspect that, GMO, genetically modified, food, it's mixed. It's not really natural anymore. It's all chemicals down here in Mexico, for example. We're talking about here it's traditionally, culturally, the food usually is a lot cleaner. The food, the meats, we customarily, at least, in the smaller cities and towns, we have the habit of eating, meat that's, just a couple days old, maximum, or a day old, fresh meat in the markets. But, with recent, generations, as far as, or decade, I guess we can say, recent decade, a lot of GMO, a lot of chemicals in the food. It's not as natural before. For example, here, speaking of Mexico, you have grandmothers, grandfathers, people in their higher, the elderly, they die at an old age, man. It's common to hear, people dying from yesteryear, age 90 years old, because they used to eat, it's like what Curtis is saying right now. They used to eat, the food back then was a lot cleaner, here in Mexico, just recently, not too long ago, the food started getting really, really contaminated now. So, I mean, we still see generations that die old because they're from back in the day, man, where they eat wholesome food, nutritious food. And I think that has a lot to do with it, because that's why I asked you. I was kind of just wondering, like, fighters who fought so many rounds, sounds like we're talking about these movies, what is it, Marvel, these superhuman people, but it's in reality, I think it's because it's cleaner water, cleaner nutrients, cleaner food that they used to eat, you know what I mean? And it really when you combine that with exercising and an athletic life, it just results to just superhuman amazing powers, man. Natural powers, obviously, natural human strength, man. I mean, wow. And it's just amazing. And so, Stormy, what do you have to say, like, Stormy, concerning the amount of rounds? What was like one of the most memorable fights that you remember that lasted many rounds?
You're asking me?
Yeah, Stormy. Yeah. Like, what resonates to you? What do you remember more? Like with fights that used to last a lot, had a lot more rounds compared to now.
Well, what would happen is as the fights went beyond what we now have 12 rounds, as the fight went beyond the 12th round, you would begin to see the separation between the men. Who was well prepared to go the distance, who was not, also who was mentally sharp to go in for the entire duration. There were only a few. I mean, a guy, just because he made it into the 15th didn't mean he was prepared to win in 15. He may have been able to last but not necessarily win. Always comes to my mind is the wonderful WBC heavyweight champion Larry Holmes. That fight right there, Ken Norton proved in that fight that everything he had accomplished, also his shortcomings with George Foreman, his victories over Ali, the fact that he didn't never face Frazier professionally, but they did cross paths in the gym. He proved that he belonged in that era with his fight against Holmes, because Holmes was the youngest of those guys from that era, pretty much the same age as George Foreman, but for the elder statesman in the division, Holmes was the future. He could box. He had decent punching power. He had great lateral movement. He had the most wonderful jab of the era. And with Norton competing with Holmes as well as he did and not able to get the victory against Holmes, it just proved that Holmes was the better fighter. And Holmes went on to win 19 straight title defenses. His 20th defense was against Michael Spinks when he lost. So it's like Larry Holmes became the fighter of that era, but that was a 15-round fight. And those men really gave as good as they got. It was an ebb and flow battle. You could see, one man starting out okay, then the other guy coming on, then the tide change again. Another great fight, and Kurt likes to mention this one a lot, was the wonderful fight that took place between Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns. That fight ended in the 15th. It's like Sugar Ray stopped Hearns late, but the ebb and flow that changed in that fight. Sugar Ray Leonard was the boxer puncher that came in there, and Tommy Hearns was the Motor City Cobra knocking everybody out. And during the fight, Tommy became the boxer and Leonard became the puncher and the hunter. And it was like, when you have fights like that, where you could see the two combatants transition over the duration of the rounds, it brings to mind exactly what these men bring to the ring as far as their skill set, the technique that they have to offer, their conditioning, and also their mental strength that they bring into the fight. And mental strength was a the word escapes me right now. Emmanuel Stewart used to refer to it a lot in great fighters, because a lot of fighters don't have it. And when a quality like that a fighter brings to the ring is what can separate them with victory over defeat.
Now, something, 19 title defenses, Stormy? 19?
Yeah, his fight against Spinks was his 20th.
Oh my gosh. Wow. I mean, and I remember what I wrote it down actually. Kurtis said when we started the show, Kurtis, just real quick, because this resident, this just brings to my mind, who was it that was undefeated? I think you said, Kurtis, through 1719 to 1730. Who was that fighter?
He was a bare-knuckle fighter named James Figg.
Thank you. Yeah, James Figg. 1719 to 1730, undefeated?
Yeah, 1719 to 1730. That's
oh my
correct.
Gosh, man.
Open up an amphitheater for young fighters to follow his footsteps.
Oh my gosh.
Also, Renee Box Young,
yeah.
In his 20th defense against Michael Spinks, Larry Holmes was going for the tie of Rocky Marciano's record of 49-0, and they took it away from him. You see that? You see the politics? And the thing is, if had Larry Holmes got that 49-0, he was going to get 50. But it's like they took that away from him. And I say they took it away from him. Some people can argue, well, Spinks outworked him or whatever. Larry Holmes had a couple of defenses against a couple of challengers that were very close prior to that, and he got the decision. Fighters who were better heavyweight fighters than Michael Spinks was. Michael Spinks was a legendary light heavyweight fighter, but no, he was no great heavyweight fighter. He was just a light heavyweight that moved up. Okay. And there were fighters who contended against Larry Holmes for his heavyweight title, close matches that easily could have gone a decision, go a different way, but Holmes got the decision. But funny, the irony, when he was going to tie Rocky Marciano's record of 49-0, they finally give the decision to another man.
Wow. Politics sticking its dirty nose in the game, man, in the sport. Yeah, definitely, man. That's horrible, dude. So real quick, man, I want to get to these. Yeah. Reggie had a question. Reggie had a question here in the chat. If any of you guys would like to answer here, Kurtis or Stormy, were rounds back then timed? That's a really good question because that was kind of resonating. I mean, that's a good question because, you know, considering the amount of rounds they had back in the day, man. Talking about.
Yeah, rounds was always 3 minutes.
Damn, they went 110. Oh yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so Reggie or Stormy, and you guys can chime in on that. Were they timed on those days, those rounds?
Rounds was always 3 minutes.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Yeah. Okay, so you see, I repeat it time and time again, man. I'm always saying it. No, this is exactly, man. I just, you know, it's necessary when we talk about the sport of boxing. Obviously, you know, there are shows and episodes. I constantly do it on my channel. I mean, where I talk about modern day boxing, constantly about fighters now. But, you know, there has to be time taken, you know, an appreciable, a respected amount of time. You know, that's why I try to shoot for 2 hours to talk about vintage boxing because, you know, and mix it with now because, you know, it's definitely important. We got to respect these legends. We got to respect, you know, the legends that have, you know, paved the way. You know what I mean? They paved the way to what we know of the sport of boxing. You're talking about rounds that went 60, 80, 100. I mean, that blows my mind. That totally blows my mind, man. So, oh my God, it's hard for my head to wrap around that and to understand it. But I mean, it happened, you know, and there are recorded events of that many rounds. So it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah, Stormy, were you gonna say something?
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, that's right. So yeah, man, I mean, it's just mind blowing. Now let's just conclude with this. And then we'll get to our, you know, we'll get to your last thoughts. Reggie, you know, I used to, you know, I'm not like, you know, I haven't seen so much vintage boxing. But I'm starting to get into it in the past few months. I've been starting to watch fights and stuff like that. And, you know, that's exactly why, you know, I thought of this series. I love to have you guys on here. And that's why I started this series. And I remember watching fights back in the day where it seemed like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, right? That's why I learned from you guys. I remember watching some clips back in the day from fighting from a long time ago, black and white days. I don't even remember the years, but where the fighters used to like shake hands before they fought. Reggie, do you think, or I don't know if you know anything along these lines, that were fighters more like gentlemen back in the day? Were they more gentlemen, you know, or where they do a face off and you know, they shake hands and then they don't push each other or they don't trash talk in front of each other? Or do you see it a little bit more dirty now as far as that, less gentleman-esque, I guess you can say, right? Because I remember seeing them shaking hands, and when they finished, I think they shook hands too. You know, do you see like fighters were more gentlemen back then than now? What do you think about that, Reggie?
No, I think we just get more sound bites out of some fighters, but not all fighters are hostile towards each other. We even speak about fighters being too friendly, and I think you had fighters back in the past who were friendly. But when two fighters going into combat don't like each other, you shouldn't expect any respect out of them. And sometimes you may get the greatest exchange between them when there's a little bit of a conflict between the two. But I don't think there's been nothing different. I mean, if they had the camera and the coverage that they had back in the day, especially when the sport was so deeply racially segregated, you probably would have heard a lot of disrespect between the two fighters. So no, I can't give that gentleman aspect on past era fighting, because there was a lot of dysfunction in society.
Right.
America was more deeply and openly racially divided. Uh, uh, there was also always this constant battle. The struggles that many of these fighters come up out of. How can they be gentle about things? I think they forced what I hear from about Joe Louis. They forced him to present himself as being kind of meek and quiet and all this other stuff. But I don't think nothing separates a fighter. A fighter is a fighter. When you don't like someone, why show respect? Go in there to hurt each other to begin with. So I don't think an era transcends people being gentle and all that. And I know people go in the past and they paint this picture of people being kinder, nicer. I can't agree with that, because I can also dig up and hear stories about how vicious people can be towards each other back then. And that those time periods were an open acceptance about being vicious towards each other, not being kind. But that's the tale of America. America ain't been a kind place. So I don't think there's no difference in that. But we just have more coverage. We're more privy to the information that's happening in this modern era, unlike the past.
Yeah, great. Well said, man. Well said. What about you, Kurtis? Do you see kind of a parallel? You know, maybe there's more respect now than there was before between fighters, or on the contrary?
Nothing has changed really. We just don't see back in the day that how fighters were treated. That they used to yell at Jack Johnson when he used to fight. Other fighters like John L. Sullivan. I talk about him, but he was against Jack Johnson. He used to call him racial epithets, and Jim Corbett. They all was in Jim Jeffries' corner. That was the original fight of the century on July 4th, 1910. They used to yell at him. And Jack Johnson was cool as a cucumber. And just like Reggie Owens said, he brought up a good point. Joe Louis, who came afterwards, used to have to be meek and subtle and, almost kowtown to people, because they didn't want him gloating over his white fallen contenders and taking pictures with white women and stuff like that. So boxing always been a sport where it attracted a lot of unsavory characters. And, fighters back in the day, they used to have a term, bum and tomato can. Oh, he's a tomato can, meaning he wasn't that good, you had rivalries like Ali and Frazier, who started off as friends, and Ali took it too far and it became a personal thing. So boxing always had that underlying rivalry and disrespect. Most people like it because they figure it will make for a great fight. I know fighters in the 1800s, a couple of them got lynched, and
Wow.
so, so it always, and when Jack Johnson became champion, they stopped the film, the police, and when he knocked out Jim Jeffries, there was race riots. So everything is connected, to boxing. Boxing always been on the stage because it's a compelling sport, and you root for your guy. That was the white establishment, and they didn't want to see Jack Johnson. Because he threw it in their face. I don't want to veer too far off the subject, but he dressed nice and the golden smile and all that. But boxing always been in a hostile environment.
Most definitely. What about you, Stormy? What can you say on that?
Well, I think Kurt pretty much covered it, man. That's it's always been that way. The perception has been a gentleman's sport over the consideration, two men combatants going in, they shake hands, they go out and fight or whatever. But remember, as this started, I'm pitting my slave against your slave, or the butler against the butcher. It's like
right.
It didn't start off in a gentlemanly fashion, because they were just pitting flesh against flesh, as Mike Tyson eloquently put it, peddling the flesh, so for profit. So no, there's nothing gentlemanly about that at all.
Definitely. Hamza, Kurt Hamza's asking, Tony Galento? I heard he was really dirty back in the days. Hamza's asking you, Kurt.
Yeah, he knocked down Joe Louis. Joe Louis wound up knocking him out in the fourth round. He's from Jersey, where I'm from. Man, he was like he had an enigmatic personality, very funny. You know, he used to say, "I murdered a bum." That was one of his favorite sayings. You know, very short and rotund. You know, that was a funny fight for Joe. Beat the hell out of him after he knocked Joe down. But he was a funny guy, Tony, two-ton Tony Galento.
Oh, Renee, I want to add something that I remember hearing from one of the past shows. I don't remember who did it. I don't know if it was Fanon or it might have been from you, Kurt. But with the whole thought of how boxing is labeled the gentleman's sport, but I hear that comes from back in kind of that 1800 periods where you had the duels and people handle conflicts in the street, take what is it, 10 paces, they turn around, they gun each other down. Now the way in which you resolve conflicts through the sport of boxing, putting the guns down, putting on the gloves, and this is where it comes from, being handling things like men or gentlemen rather than I guess using a gun, you'll be a violent man. So that's why I hear where boxing gets this kind of perceived notion that it's a sport of gentlemen and stuff.
Yeah, that's an old term, the gentleman sport. It's like calling boxing a sweet science or, pugilism. They had all kind of names for, the early origins. It's like calling soccer. They call it the beautiful game. So that term, the gentleman sport, is a very early term for the sport of boxing. They just, and plus they thought it would sound better because remember, boxing was outlawed. If two fighters fought, cops be there waiting for him to lock him up. So boxing used to be illegal. It's crazy, but something that makes money. It used to be illegal. So they coined the phrase the gentleman sport for one of the main reasons. They wanted to make it sound like it was gentleman like, or Renee would say gentleman esque. But that was just the rules. The boxing is a brutal but beautiful sport.
Yeah, I think that's why I got the perception, right, from back in the day, boxing being more like boxers being more gentlemen, that's kind of how I got the perception of it. Yeah, definitely. Wow. All right, guys. So any last words, man? We're almost hitting in 2 hours. I love it. I love this, man. I love having you guys on here. I learned from all you guys, man. Any last words, Reggie?
No, man, came too quick of a damn end, but great conversation, man. I like the open dialogue and the history that was told. I just enjoy it, man. Like I said, I enjoyed the sport of boxing. My kids act like they hate it because I'm always talking about it, but they love it. So even when they think they hate it, they love it because they get to talk about boxing. I see them in their tablets pulling up boxing stuff. My son will walk up, putting his guards up on me, throwing his punches, testing his punches with me, and I love it. So they picking up on it. They may hate to see me doing lives and stuff like that, but all in all, it's going to teach them how to handle themselves, protecting themselves, and that's what I'm glad that I'm covering from the aspects that I cover it, hearing some of the lessons from the sport, and also when they in here, because they always up under me. So when they see me watching these older fights and also modern fights, they're picking up on things. And my thing is that I always want them to be able to handle themselves, protect themselves, and also to be able to protect yourself, you have to learn. You have to find things to teach you, because one of the hardest things where you hear about all this bullying with kids, one of the hardest things for some kids to do is to condition their minds to be able to put their fist up, be willing to go in there and engage with another person on the other side, looking to who pose a threat to them. And a lot of kids coward because they haven't been conditioned to getting their minds prepared for what they have to do to defend themselves against bullying. So that's why I like covering it. I like having them around me as I'm doing it. And I just love it. And then just not to just watch punches being thrown, but also looking at the technical aspects of what is happening. But that's all I got, man. I just love this shit.
Definitely, man. Definitely. I love having you guys here always, man. It's such an honor, such a, fun time having with you guys. Stormy B, any last words, brother?
Yeah, wonderful conversation. Thank you for having me and inviting me on to your show and your platform. And again, a lot to be learned, for the sport. We covered some things that hadn't been talked about, and I really enjoy participating in discussions like this. Reggie, salute to you. Salute to you, Renee Box Young. Salute to Kurt. This is what it's all about, man. When you speak on the sport has so much to offer, and don't be mired in what's present. You have to know your history, man. You have to know your history in life. And if you're going to be invested in this sport, it's great to know a little bit of the history of this sport. You don't have to know all of it, but just know something other than what's in your in your face presently, because there is such a rich history of what has circled around this sport. And the more invested you become in that, the more capable you become as far as what you see presently. So that's what I have to offer. Again, thank you so much for having me here, man. And till the next time.
So true, man. I like how you said that, Stormy, that, we don't have to know everything, but it's important to get into it and start learning. I mean, so many things that can be learned, about our own lives through the sport of boxing, that help us be, fight in life. I remember, as a matter of fact, recently Stormy was talking about that. Stormy was talking about in one of his shows, I don't remember which one it was, but one of his lives where he was talking about that, how we can implement things, elements of the sport of boxing in our own lives. We fight for our lives. We fight for our families, our jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, that's right on point, man. Kurtis, any last words, brother? Salute Blue Blood Sports TV. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, man. Blue Blood, much love to you, man. Thank you so much for tuning in, brother. Thank you so much, man. Kurtis, any last words, bro?
Yeah, I love the sport of boxing. I mean, people just don't understand. Just like my ex-girl said, it's my true wife. It's my true girl. There will never be a divorce between me and boxing, man. Through my father, boxing is so deep. When I watch a fight, I imagine my fathers and uncles in the room. Most of them are died. My father passed away in '87 after the Hagler Leonard fight. He the one that got me into the sport. I love the sport. Oh man, I don't know what to say. Renee, man, you got a great channel, man. I love it. Reggie Owens, man, I like what you're doing with the old fights, man. Salute to you, man, because you're a young guy who wants to learn. And Stormy, co-host, the host, I'm the co-host, and we got a great show called The Three Wise Men of Boxing that comes on Thursday at 9 o'clock, and we talk about the history of the sport. Boxing, like Stormy said, has a very rich culture, man. You don't have to know everything. I don't care if you know a little bit, because I'm still learning from people, and you guys give me praise and call me the historian and encyclopedia of boxing, which I appreciate greatly. But I learn every day. You cannot never learn enough. It's like you can never have enough money, So, I take that, and I appreciate it, and I like to see people come together and talk about boxing, and I haven't, I took a step back. I used to be on multiple shows, because I have health issues, but, I just love boxing, man. And I want to see, and boxing is in a tough spot right now, but this is where the history, look at an old fight. There's no fights right now. Fights are being canceled. I believe Louis Neris was supposed to have fought today. His fight was canceled. So this is the perfect time to watch the history of the sport. I try to watch boxing as much as I can, man. I have thousands upon thousands of fights in my library, man, but you got YouTube. So there's no excuse. YouTube is wide open, but Renee, I admire what you're doing, man. You have a very good boxing mind, man, and channel. And it's a pleasure being on here, man. And salute to the chat. Thank you for your time, man. I just want to say peace and blessings to everyone.
Definitely, man. And thanks again, man, for all you guys being here. Thank you so much, Kurtis, Stormy, Reggie, taking out your time, man. I really, really appreciate it. Your time is so valuable. Honorable guests. Again, thank you so much, everybody in the chat who joined in, who's listening in, who's tuning in. Remember to share, remember to like, remember to subscribe. Remember to subscribe also, to Kurtis, to Stormy, to Boxing Conversation, Reggie Owens. Subscribe to all those who are in the chat, to Bruce Goes, to D Hodges, to Blue Blood Sports. I'm sure everybody is already subscribed. TZ Frank, G Funky, D Style. The list goes on and on. I mean, just go ahead and check the chat. They're all there. G5 Gabe, et cetera, man. Go subscribe, show the support to everybody. You know what I mean? And be real quick before we leave, guys, I just want to say, I want to invite you guys, give you the cordial invitation at 5:15 in about an hour. In another hour, I have the plan of interviewing Albert Prince Bell, okay, WBC Continental America's super featherweight champion, man. He's going to be on with me. We're just going to chop it out briefly. We're not going to take too long because he has his time also. He has things to do. So, yeah, man, I'm going to interview him. So if you guys want to go ahead and join in on that live, too, in about an hour, in about another hour, we're going to have him live, too. And we're going to just talk about boxing, man, talk about his up and coming. He's a prospect, amazing fighter, man, champ. You know what I mean? So he has skills, man. I really like his skill, what he brings on the table into the ring. He just fought recently on on one of these top ranked cards. So, I had my eye on him for a while. So, yeah, I invite you guys to go ahead and check it out. If you guys have any questions for him, if you guys tune in, you guys go ahead and ask the questions there in the chat. So, thank you guys again so much for being here, man. Love you guys. Reggie, Stormy, Kurtis, can you guys stay just again like 1 minute after the live? Okay, right after I close this, can you guys just stay in there for a second, man? Thank you guys so much again. Much love to everybody, and sooner than later, we're gonna have part 4 of this series. Now we're gonna keep pushing this out because, man, we can't get enough of this, like Kurtis said, man. So get back into old school fighting, man. Go get back in, because right now we're in that era right now, or as far as a period we're going through right now. This unfortunate incident we're going through, the crisis and stuff. Well, you have time, guys. You guys have time to go back and go look at some old school fights. Go join Reggie Owens and those fights that he puts there and commentates on his channel, man. It's fun. It's so fun being there, man. So go ahead and check it out. Go ahead and check those fights out. Thank you guys so much. Renee Box Young, salute from the South. Thank you guys. One love. Peace out, fam. Stay safe.
Peace.